You can miss any of my other videos, but you surely don't want to miss this. This video is going to show you exactly how to answer the 15 marks question in paper 1. Okay, let's go. Now, this exact question appeared in the November 2024 SL paper. Using real-life example, evaluate the view that public goods should always be provided by the government. Before we jump into analysis, we need to get the definitions right. First, public goods. Public goods are goods and services that are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. That means one person using the good doesn't reduce how much is available for others, and it's difficult or impossible to stop people from using it once it's provided. Because of this, we get the free rider problem, so the market may underprovide public goods. Second, we need to define direct provision. Direct provision means the government produces and supplies the good itself, usually funded by taxation. So instead of just regulating firms or giving subsidies, the government is actually the one delivering the good or service, often through a public agency. And these are terms that, if you're not an economics student, you probably wouldn't fully understand. So defining them clearly sets up the whole essay properly. Next, we move on to the diagram part. Because of the characteristics of public goods, the market tends to underprovide them. So first, we need a basic market failure diagram showing underproduction, basically the diagram for a positive externality of production, okay? After that, we need a second diagram to explain what happens after the government directly provides the good. In the most ideal scenario, what would we expect to happen? So in this second diagram, you still start with the same under-provision setup. Again, that's the positive externality of production. But on top of that, you add the solution. Because of direct provision, the supply increases, and in the diagram, that's shown as the supply curve, which is your MPC curve, shifting to the right. Once MPC shifts right, you'll get a new equilibrium, where MPB intersects the new MPC. And in the most ideal scenario, that new market outcome lands exactly at the point where MSB equals MSC. So now, Q market becomes exactly equal to the socially optimal level of output, meaning the underprovision problem is fully corrected, optimal in the ideal case. When you're explaining the diagram, the key thing you're really explaining is this: why do public goods lead to underprovision? So in the first diagram, the reason behind underprovision is basically that the market supply is too low, because for producers, the marginal private cost, MPC, is effectively too high. And why is MPC too high from the firm's point of view? Because with public goods, you can't really charge people. It's non-excludable, so even if you provide it, people can still consume it without paying. So for the producer, you're paying the cost, but you're not capturing the revenue, and that kills the incentive to supply. That's why private firms are unwilling to produce enough, and we end up with underprovision. But from society's perspective, public goods create huge positive spillover benefits. For example, if you install streetlights, it doesn't just help the person who paid for it. The whole street becomes brighter and safer. That can reduce crime, improve productivity, and make the whole city function more efficiently. So socially, the benefits are much bigger than the private benefits, which is exactly why the free market outcome ends up below the socially optimal level of output. Then, after we finish explaining the first diagram, we move to the second diagram. And here you must emphasize one thing. This is an idealized scenario, because in real life, the government doesn't always get it perfectly right. They might overproduce, underproduce, or waste resources, and that's going to become one of our key evaluation points later. But for now, in the most ideal case, direct provision means the government can step in and shift MPC rightward by exactly the missing amount. In other words, the part that the private sector is unwilling to provide, the government provides it instead. And if the shift is exactly the right size, then the market failure disappears. Now Q market becomes equal to Q socially optimal. So there's no longer underprovision, and the economy achieves allocative efficiency, because now we're producing at the point where society's welfare is maximized. And in the most ideal scenario, that new market outcome lands exactly at the point where MSB equals MSC. Now, the real evaluation is where we talk about the pros and cons of direct government provision of public goods. So the biggest advantage is simple. It can solve the underprovision problem. Like we just showed in the diagram, if the government steps in, then in a really ideal scenario, it can shift supply by exactly the missing amount. That means the economy moves from Q market to Q socially optimal, and we can achieve allocative efficiency. But because this is a 15 marker, we can't just stop there. We need to challenge our own point. The first way to challenge it is information failure. In real life, the government might not actually have enough accurate information to know what is the exact socially optimal level of output. So even if the intention is good, the government can still end up underproviding or overproviding, simply because it's hard to measure the true social benefits and costs. The second issue is the cost. Direct provision needs funding, usually through taxation or borrowing, and for less developed countries or countries with low government revenue, especially if they already have a budget deficit, this can become a really heavy burden. And linked to that is the opportunity cost. If the government spends a huge amount of money providing this public good, that money can't be used somewhere else. And in a country that isn't very rich, the better option might actually be spending on healthcare, education, or even debt repayment, depending on the situation. Okay, so here's another evaluation angle. Technology can sometimes reduce the public good problem by changing one of its key characteristics, especially excludability. Let's look at Netflix. Think about movies in the old days. A lot of revenue depended on selling DVDs, but the problem is, once a movie is in digital form, it becomes really easy to copy and pirate, which makes it hard to exclude non-paying users. So producers struggle to capture revenue, but Netflix uses a subscription system, plus account controls and digital access restrictions, so only paying users can access the content. In other words, technology helps turn something that feels public good-like into something much more excludable, closer to a club good, and once it becomes excludable, private firms actually have a business incentive to provide it. Now, a second example is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is much closer to the idea of a public good. It's free to access, and one person using it doesn't stop anyone else from using it, so it's largely non-rival and non-excludable. But here's the key point for evaluation. Wikipedia is not directly provided by the government. It's run by the Wikimedia Foundation, and its main funding source is donations. For example, in fiscal year 2023-2024, Wikimedia reported total revenue of about $185.4 million, and around $174.7 million of that came from donations. So in the conclusion part, you can challenge the word always. Some goods only become public good-like because exclusion is difficult, but technology can sometimes restore excludability, so private provision becomes possible. But for true public goods like street lighting, where exclusion is basically impossible, the market is still likely to underprovide, and government provision is much more justifiable.